The void was an indifferent canvas, stretched taut and infinite, upon which the faint, cold starlight of a million distant suns offered no comfort, only the stark reminder of humanity's precarious perch. Within this abyssal expanse, the Athelian reach existed as a forgotten pocket, a scattering of systems bypassed by the Emperor's Great Crusade and largely ignored by the cumbersome behemoth of the Imperium for millennia. Its isolation had allowed humanity to flourish in myriad fragmented forms, some worlds regressing to feudal barbarity, others stagnating in techno-feudalism, all of them breeding grounds for disunity and nascent threats. It was into this forgotten crucible that the Iron Vigil was cast, a chapter forged not merely from gene seed and ceramite, but from a singular unyielding philosophy, absolute unity, achieved through absolute means. Their genesis was shrouded in the murky records of a cursed founding, a time of frantic genetic experimentation and desperate chapter creation in the Imperium's ceaseless war. The specific lineage of the Iron Vigil was obscured, deliberately or accidentally, a common fate for those batches deemed problematic or unpredictable by the secretive Magos biologists of Mars. What was clear, however, was the distinctive strain in their gene seed, a predisposition towards order so profound it bordered on the fanatical. Where other chapters might champion courage, honor, or faith, the Iron Vigil held unity as their paramount virtue, believing it to be the only true bulwark against the universe's inherent malevolence. Disunity in their eyes was not merely a flaw, but a heresy against the Emperor's ultimate vision for mankind. Their progenitor, Chapter Master Solon Varkos, was a figure of grim resolve, his face a craggy landscape of hardened conviction, his eyes like chips of obsidian that betrayed no emotion, only an unyielding purpose. He was a veteran of 1,000 wars, a warrior who had witnessed firsthand the horrors born of fractious human empires collapsing into civil war, of worlds devoured by Xenos because they could not present a united front. These indelible experiences had coalesced within him into a single unshakable truth. Only absolute, unwavering unity could save humanity from itself and its innumerable enemies. Upon their completion of training and the grim rituals that forged them into Astartes, the newly formed chapter of the Iron Vigil was assigned to the Athelian Reach. It was a sector deemed low priority, yet strategically important enough to warrant an eventual, full-scale pacification. The High Lords of Terra, perhaps weary of the endless administrative burden of managing disparate and often rebellious fringe worlds, saw in the Iron Vigil's nascent ideology a potential solution. They were given a mandate: bring the Athelian Reach into compliant, ordered unity. The methods were left, chillingly, to the chapter's discretion. Master Varkos saw this assignment not as a mere deployment, but as a divine calling, a perfect canvas upon which to paint the flawless tapestry of Imperial unity. He gathered his newly minted captains in the primary command crypt of the chapter's mobile fortress monastery, the Vanguard of Solon, a hulking armored vessel bristling with the newest generation of void weaponry and ceramite plating. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and sacred oils, the only illumination provided by the flickering lumen globes that cast long, dancing shadows of the assembled Astartes. Brothers, Varkos's voice resonated through the chamber, deep and unyielding. We stand at the precipice of our chapter's destiny. The Athelian Reach, a sector forgotten by the greater Imperium, is riddled with the cancer of disunity. Feral tribes clash beneath stagnant suns, techno-barbarians war over rust-choked ruins, and petty tyrants squabble for dust-laden thrones. This is not the Emperor's will. This is a betrayal of the very essence of humanity's purpose. He paced slowly, his heavy boots echoing on the adamantium deck. We are the Iron Vigil. Our purpose is clear. We shall bring order where chaos reigns. We shall enforce unity where factionalism breeds weakness. We shall illuminate the path to compliance, even if that path must be paved with the bodies of the uncompliant. His gaze swept over each helmeted face, piercing through the visors, searching for any flicker of doubt. There was none, only the stoic, unwavering focus of newly forged space marines, indoctrinated to their chapter's core tenets. Let the administratum fret over their quotas, let the Inquisition hunt their heretics in the shadows. Varkos continued, his voice rising with a controlled passion. Our crusade is grander. We do not merely purge the enemy, we eliminate the very concept of separate enemies. We unite humanity, by will or by force, so that it may stand as one unbreakable shield against the horrors of the galaxy. Our conquests will not be for plunder nor for glory, but for the sacred principle of cohesion. We shall replace fragmentation with structure, anarchy with law, and the cacophony of dissent with the solemn symphony of imperial service. He stopped before a holographic projection of the Athelian Reach, a sprawling nebula of stars and planetary bodies, many still uncharted, most untouched by true imperial governance. A specific world, Xylos Prime, shimmered at the edge of the projection, designated as their first target. It was a world known for its advanced but fractured human civilizations, a mosaic of warring city-states and nascent empires, all locked in a perpetual struggle for dominance. Our mission begins on Xylos Prime, Varkos declared, his hand hovering over the flickering image, a world ripe for salvation, yet stubborn in its self-destruction. We shall bring them the Emperor's peace, not as a choice, but as an inevitability. We are not conquerors in the old ways, but architects of a new unified future. Our conquest will be enlightened, for we bring the light of imperial truth, even if its glare burns away the dross of their outdated traditions and petty freedoms. The captains saluted, their gauntleted fists striking their chest plates in unison, a sharp, resonant clang that filled the command crypt. The message was unambiguous. The Iron Vigil was not here to negotiate, nor to compromise. They were here to build an empire of absolute order, brick by bloody brick, even if it meant tearing down everything that stood in their way. The Athelian Reach was about to learn the grim cost of true unity, for the Iron Vigil believed that a single unbreakable fist was the only form humanity could take in a galaxy that sought its extinction. Their campaign was not merely war, it was an act of profound and profoundly brutal restructuring. The first sparks of their enlightened conquest were about to ignite the darkness of the Forgotten Sector. Xylos Prime was a world of verdant continents and sprawling turbulent oceans, its surface scarred by the ceaseless conflicts of a dozen human polities. From orbital altitude, the Iron Vigil's augurs painted a picture of humanity in microcosm, grand cities with spires reaching for the clouds, surrounded by sprawling manufactories fueled by ancient, unreliable technologies, all connected by vast, unpatrolled trade routes that were as much battlegrounds as conduits of commerce. Between these bastions of relative advancement lay immense untamed wildernesses, home to scattered feudal clans and nomadic tribes, many still worshipping forgotten gods or crude animistic spirits. It was a world of vibrant, chaotic life, and to the Iron Vigil it was a festering wound of disunity that demanded the surgeon's scalpel. Chapter Master Solon Varkos surveyed the holographic projection of Xylos Prime from the bridge of the vanguard of Solon, his gaze unwavering. "Observe, brothers," he intoned, gesturing to the flickering map. The symptom of a greater malaise. Potential squandered, strength fractured, ingenuity turned inwards. They build monuments to their own ephemeral power while the galaxy burns around them. This is not the way of the Emperor. His voice carried the weight of absolute conviction, utterly devoid of judgment for the specific factions, only for the concept of their division. The initial planetary survey had been swift and mercilessly efficient. No attempts at diplomatic overtures were made. The Iron Vigil did not parley with disunity. Instead, their forces descended with the precision of a celestial hammer. Strike Cruiser, unifying Truth, and its sister ships, initiated orbital insertion, their thunderous descent rupturing the tranquil Xylosian skies. The first target was the continent of Viridian, home to the dominant technologically advanced city-state of Ethelgard, known for its formidable orbital defense network and its aggressive expansionist policies against its neighbors. The Ethelgardian High Council, caught entirely unawares, first mistook the incoming vessels for a rival power's clandestine attack fleet. Their planetary defense platforms roared to life, unleashing a torrent of energy bolts and missile barrages. It was a futile gesture. The vanguard of Solon, a vessel designed for spearheading crusades, shrugged off the attacks with contemptuous ease, its void shields shimmering with disdain. Return fire from the Iron Vigil's fleet was not a scattered exchange, but a surgical, overwhelming onslaught. Macro-cannon batteries unleashed salvos that obliterated defense platforms in blinding flashes of energy, while lance batteries carved through the largest urban fortifications like hot knives through plasteel. Within minutes, Ethelgard's orbital capability was nullified, reduced to drifting wreckage and silent burning hulks. Then came the drop pods, thousands of them, screaming down through the atmosphere like fiery meteors, each carrying a squad of Astartes heralded by the unholy shriek of their descent. They struck the designated landing zones with earth-shattering impact, not in the wilderness nor on the outskirts of cities, but directly into the heart of Ethelgard's administrative and military districts. The intent was clear: decapitation, shock, and awe. The Xylosian defenders, though well armed by their world's standards, were utterly unprepared for the ferocity and scale of the attack. Their pulse rifles and kinetic slug throwers merely chipped ceramite. Their rudimentary armored vehicles were effortlessly torn apart by plasma guns and melta-weapons. The Iron Vigil moved with the grim, silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine, each battle brother a perfect cog in the engine of war. Their tactics were direct, relentless, and devastatingly effective. They did not retreat, did not falter, did not hesitate. Captain Lyris, commander of the Third Company, led the spearhead assault on the citadel of Ethelgard, the seat of the High Council. His Terminators, clad in their imposing tactical dreadnought armor, strode through reinforced plasteel doors as if they were made of paper, their storm bolters spitting a continuous hail of mass reactive shells. Lyris himself, a hulking figure even among his brethren, wielded a thunderhammer that detonated anything it struck into a spray of molecular dust. No quarter for the disunited. Lyris's vox-amplified roar echoed through the internal comms, a chilling mantra that resonated with every Astartes. Break their will, grind their defiance to dust. The Emperor's peace will be absolute. The battle for Ethelgard was less a protracted war and more a surgical purge. Within 3 cycles, the city's military command structure was shattered, its leadership either executed or captured, its populace cowering amidst the wreckage. The Iron Vigil did not indulge in wanton destruction beyond what was necessary for pacification, but neither did they shy from it. Entire districts, deemed centers of stubborn resistance, were reduced to rubble by accurate bombardments, serving as stark object lessons to any who considered further defiance. The conquest of Ethelgard was merely the first phase. The Iron Vigil then turned their attention to the lesser city-states and the surrounding tribal regions. Their strategy was always the same: swift, overwhelming force against any organized resistance, followed by the systematic dismantling of local governance and the immediate imposition of imperial authority. On the plains of Eredor, where nomadic horse tribes had warred for generations, the Iron Vigil's land raiders swept across the landscape like avenging angels, their heavy bolters scything down warrior hordes that charged with primitive spears and swords, believing their numbers and ferocity could overcome anything. They learned the brutal truth of the Astartes' might as their bodies were shredded by high-caliber shells and their fortified encampments disintegrated under the wrath of vehicle-mounted less cannons. A particularly poignant example of the Iron Vigil's methods unfolded on the continent of Solara, where the ancient monastic order of the Sunstone Weavers had maintained a fragile peace for centuries, a culture rich in art, philosophy, and intricate societal rituals. They offered no military resistance, only pleas for understanding for the preservation of their unique way of life. They revered their ancestral temples filled with centuries of accumulated knowledge and delicate artistic masterpieces. Chapter Master Varkos, presented with their petitions, listened without comment. His response was delivered not in words but in deeds. While the Weavers were not purged wholesale, their temples were systematically stripped of anything deemed incompatible with imperial truth. Ancient texts, intricate tapestries, and ornate sculptures were either confiscated for imperial scrutiny, or if they contained any hint of pre-imperial religious practices or cultural uniqueness that could foster disunity, they were incinerated. The high elders of the Weavers were offered a choice: integrate into the nascent imperial administratum as functionaries, their ancient wisdom to be repurposed for the emperor's service, or face re-education. Many chose the former, their faces etched with despair, their spirits broken by the cold, unyielding logic of their new masters. Those who resisted even passively were labeled as cultural dissidents and removed. The Iron Vigil's engineers and tech priests followed in the wake of the Astartes, their macro forges dropping from orbit, establishing rapid build infrastructure. Old Xylosian roads were quickly expanded into reinforced imperial arteries. Local energy grids were subsumed into larger, more efficient, and centrally controlled networks. The very landscape began to change, reflecting the grim, utilitarian aesthetic of the Imperium. Hab blocks rose where ancient dwellings stood, their uniform, gray facades a stark contrast to the varied architectures they replaced. Communication arrays, monitored by the chapter's own intelligence cadres, were erected to ensure not a single word of dissent or a whisper of rebellion could go unnoticed. The pacification of Xylos Prime took less than 6 months. The Iron Vigil had operated with an almost chilling detachment, their actions guided solely by the overriding imperative of imposed order. They had observed no local holidays, respected no ancient customs, and acknowledged no pre-existing hierarchies unless they could be immediately repurposed for Imperial service. Any attempt to cling to the old ways was seen not as cultural preservation, but as a seed of future disunity, and thus swiftly eradicated. The casualties were immense, both in terms of Xylosian lives and the intangible loss of their world's unique identity. Billions had died, directly or indirectly, in the Iron Vigil's relentless campaign. Yet, when the chapter master addressed his forces from the newly erected Imperial Planetary Command Center, built atop the ruins of Eithilgard's former citadel, his voice betrayed no remorse, only the quiet satisfaction of a grim task well begun. "Xylos Prime stands," Varkos declared, his words broadcast across the unified Vox channels that now spanned the entire globe, reaching every forced labor camp, every newly constructed hab block, every remaining Xylosian citizen. It stands as a testament to the Emperor's will and to the Iron Vigil's unyielding purpose. The fragmentation has been purged. The disunity has been crushed. This world is now a single compliant cog in the greater machine of the Imperium. Let its fate serve as a beacon or a warning to all others in the Athelian Reach. Unity is not a plea, it is a command, and we, the Iron Vigil, are its executors. A planetary governor, chosen from the most compliant and ruthlessly efficient of the surviving Xylosian administrators, was appointed, his every move scrutinized by a cadre of the chapter's chapter serfs, and a detachment of their grim tech marines. A tithe was imposed, not merely of resources, but of manpower. Young Xylosians, particularly those exhibiting any signs of intelligence or strength, were immediately conscripted into nascent Imperial Guard regiments or, for the most zealous, into the chapter's own servitor thrall ranks, their identities subsumed, their individuality erased, all for the greater good of a unified Imperium. Xylos Prime, once a vibrant, fractious tapestry of human life, was now a neatly ordered, rigidly compliant, and spiritually broken world. It was a perfectly functioning cog, stripped of its soul, ready to serve the vast, uncaring engine of the Imperium. The Iron Vigil had achieved their first enlightened conquest. The cost, though immeasurable to the Xylosians, was, in the chapter's cold calculation, a necessary price for absolute unity. The Athelian Reach was next. The pacification of Xylos Prime served as the grim blueprint for the Iron Vigil's relentless expansion across the Athelian Reach. With their first success cementing their doctrine, the chapter embarked upon a systematic, brutal campaign that would forever alter the forgotten sector, grinding down centuries of disparate human development into a singular, homogeneous Imperial template. Their campaign was not one of mere conquest, but of profound, violent re-architecture, earning them the moniker among the frightened populace as the Great Architect's Hammer. The vanguard of Solon became the centerpiece of a grim, interstellar fleet, its trajectory a calculated vector of compliance. Each system within the Athelian Reach was subjected to the same chilling sequence of events: preliminary orbital survey revealing the extent of disunity, overwhelming force directed at centers of power, swift, decisive purges of resistance, and then the meticulous, uncompromising imposition of Imperial order. Consider the system of Viridia, an asterism of 3 inhabited worlds. Viridia Secundus was a gas giant with extensive orbital mining platforms, its population a transient mix of independent prospectors and corporate entities fiercely protective of their claims. The Iron Vigil arrived without warning, their fleet deploying boarding torpedoes and teleporting Terminator squads directly into the main mining hubs. The ensuing firefight was brief and one-sided. Miners, accustomed to skirmishes over resource rights, found their crude kinetic weapons useless against ceramite, and their flimsy barricades no match for power fists. Those who resisted were instantly liquidated. Those who surrendered were immediately integrated into a new, heavily regimented Imperial Guild of Extractors, their every movement now monitored, their quotas set by the chapter's tech adepts. Their corporate autonomy was erased, replaced by the rigid hierarchy of the Imperium. Viridia Alpha, A temperate world blanketed by ancient forests and inhabited by scattered clans of hunter-gatherers presented a different challenge. Here, the Iron Vigil landed without a single shot fired, marching their armored columns deep into the sylvan wilds. They found no organized resistance, only communities living in harmonious balance with their environment, worshipping nature spirits and possessing no concept of a galaxy-spanning Imperium. To the Iron Vigil, this was a form of societal anarchy, a prime example of untapped human potential, squandered in ignorance and primitive superstition. They did not raise the forests, for the world held resources that could be exploited, but they did raise the cultures. Indigenous shamans and elders who spoke of ancestral lands and spiritual connections were swiftly deemed unproductive or heretical. Their oral traditions were silenced, their sacred sites either repurposed as imperial shrines or simply ignored. The populace was rounded up, relocated into utilitarian hab villages, and put to work in nascent agricultural projects, their children immediately inducted into imperial schooling, their minds cleansed of primitive thought. Their identity, once woven into the very fabric of their world, was painstakingly unpicked and replaced with the gray uniformity of imperial citizenship. The most defiant, and perhaps most tragic, was Viridia Tertius, a rugged mountainous planet populated by fiercely independent warrior cults who believed themselves descended from ancient heroes. They had forged a harsh, self-sufficient society, their martial traditions honed by centuries of internecine warfare and skirmishes against minor indigenous Xenos. When the Iron Vigil came, they met steel with steel, their warriors launching desperate, suicidal charges against the Astartes, their war cries echoing among the peaks. These battles were some of the most protracted, not due to the efficacy of the Viridian resistance, but to their sheer, unyielding stubbornness. The Iron Vigil responded with overwhelming force, employing everything from orbital bombardment to chemical suppressants to break their will. Whole mountain strongholds were glassed, valleys turned into toxic wastes, all to crush the spirit of defiance. The few survivors were eventually forced into chain gangs, tasked with mining the very mountains they had once defended, their traditions replaced by the weary rhythm of pickaxe and shovel. Following each pacification, the Iron Vigil implemented what they termed the unification protocols. This involved a systematic restructuring of every aspect of the conquered worlds. Imperial infrastructure was established at an astonishing pace. Gigantic manufactories capable of churning out everything from basic weaponry to construction materials were erected. Astropathic choirs, albeit nascent ones, were installed to link the newly compliant worlds to the wider Imperium, though their primary function in the early stages was to relay data directly to the vanguard of Solon. Scoloprogenium facilities, grim and Spartan, were founded to indoctrinate the young, ensuring their loyalty to the Emperor and hatred of all forms of disunity. The chapter also began constructing a network of heavily fortified bastions across the Athelian Reach. These immense fortresses, crafted from adamantium and plasteel, served as garrisons for newly raised Imperial Guard regiments, administrative hubs for the sector governorates, each carefully selected for their unwavering fealty to the chapter's ideals, and, most importantly, as potent symbols of the Iron Vigil's eternal presence and unshakable authority. The largest of these, Fortress Vigilance Vipa, was built on Xylos Prime, a towering structure that loomed over the remodeled capital, its shadow a constant reminder of who truly commanded. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, initially wary of the Iron Vigil's unorthodox zeal, found themselves increasingly integrated into the chapter's campaign. The prospect of uncovering forgotten STC fragments or discovering new technological applications through the rapid industrialization of the sector proved too tempting to resist. While they sometimes balked at the brutal expediency with which the Astartes repurposed local technologies or disregarded ancient rites in favor of pure efficiency, the results were undeniable. Resource extraction soared, production capabilities skyrocketed, and communication networks became robust. The Athelian Reach, once a backwater, was becoming an economic and strategic asset for the Imperium, albeit one sculpted by an iron fist. The chapter masters of other, more traditional chapters might have viewed the Iron Vigil's methods with a degree of alarm, perhaps even questioning their adherence to the spirit, if not the letter, of the Codex Astartes. But the Athelian Reach was too remote, too insignificant in the grander tapestry of the Imperium's woes for such scrutiny. The reports flowing back to Terra were efficient and positive, sector pacified, tithes increasing, threats neutralized. The Iron Vigil, therefore, was allowed to continue its grim work, its methods implicitly sanctioned by the lack of Imperial censure. Solon Varkos, in his private meditations, saw this period not as a series of battles, but as a grand act of creation. He was the sculptor, and the disparate peoples of the Athelian Reach were the raw, unformed clay. He did not care for their unique hues, their intricate textures, or their individual imperfections. He saw only the need for a singular, unbreakable form, capable of withstanding the unimaginable pressures of the 41st millennium. The suffering, the cultural obliteration, the despair of billions, these were merely the necessary heat and pressure in the forge, purifying the raw material for its ultimate glorious purpose. In time, the Athelian Reach began to outwardly conform to the Iron Vigil's vision. Worlds that had once known only local dialects now spoke Low Gothic. Planetary defense forces, once tribal levies, now marched in the drilled ranks of the Imperial Guard. Chapels to the Emperor, stark and imposing, replaced ancient shrines. The vibrant, chaotic tapestry of disparate human cultures was replaced by a monotonous uniform gray. The Iron Vigil had not merely conquered, they had remade. They had hammered the Athelian Reach into a rigid, compliant, and perfectly ordered segment of the Imperium. But beneath the surface, the embers of suppressed individuality still smoldered, waiting for a breath of wind to ignite them anew. The architect's hammer had done its work, but the edifice it built was one of grim, enforced silence. The Iron Vigil's self-congratulatory assessment of their burgeoning dominion in the Athelian Reach, a sector meticulously reshaped into a bastion of enforced unity, was a short-lived illusion. For all their architectural prowess in dismantling human disunity, they had overlooked the cosmic indifference of a galaxy teeming with alien horrors. The void, ever the wellspring of new and unimaginable threats, began to stir, casting a shadow that challenged the very foundations of their carefully constructed order. The emergence of the Calithan Scourge presented a foe, unlike any the Iron Vigil had encountered. An insidious, opportunistic Xenos species of sentient crystalline entities that fed not on flesh, but on psychic resonance and raw emotional energy. Their first manifestation was subtle, almost imperceptible. Worlds that had recently been brought to compliance, their populations still reeling from the Iron Vigil's brutal restructuring, began to experience strange phenomena. Minor psychic manifestations previously unseen flared up in isolated communities. Dreams became vivid, unsettling, and shared. Fear, anxiety, and desperation, carefully suppressed beneath the veneer of Imperial order, began to simmer, creating a fertile ground for the nascent invaders. The Calithan Scourge were not creatures of brute force, nor did they possess fleets of star-spanning vessels in the traditional sense. Instead, they traveled through the void as fragmented crystalline dust, drawn by the psychic emanations of sentient life. Upon encountering a suitable world, these microscopic crystalline shards would permeate the atmosphere, settling into the ecosystem, slowly coalescing into larger, complex structures. They were paracausal entities, their very biology anathema to conventional Imperial science. When they achieved sufficient mass, they would manifest as shimmering, multifaceted constructs, ranging from delicate, fractal-like formations to towering, obsidian-sharp spires that pierced the sky. These larger forms acted as conduits, amplifying the psychic drain on the populace. The first major infestation occurred on the agri-world of Harvestia, a planet teeming with billions of human laborers, their lives a monotonous cycle of toil and meager sustenance. The Iron Vigil had imposed absolute unity, transforming Harvestia into a vast food-producing engine for the sector. But the crushing routine, the loss of individual agency, and the sheer volume of human minds created an irresistible lure for the Calathans. Planetary Governor Kalar, a dour, efficient administrator placed by the Iron Vigil, initially dismissed the reports as mass hysteria. Workers began to suffer from debilitating mental fatigue, their minds plagued by unsettling visions and an overwhelming sense of dread. Agricultural output began to falter as more and more laborers simply collapsed, their bodies limp, their minds vacant. Within weeks, the scale of the crisis became undeniable. Masses of crystalline structures shimmering with an unnerving inner light began to sprout from the planet's surface, particularly in areas of high population density. These constructs hummed with a low, resonant frequency that caused nausea and disorientation in close proximity. When the Iron Vigil finally deployed a company of battle brothers to Harvestia, they encountered a world subtly yet profoundly changed. The human populace, while not outwardly hostile, moved with a listless, vacant air, their eyes hollow. The few who still retained lucidity spoke of an unseen hunger that gnawed at their souls, a cold, pervasive emptiness. The crystalline constructs, when engaged, proved to be impervious to conventional ballistics. Last fire simply passed through them or was refracted, sharding off in dangerous bursts. Bolter rounds disintegrated on their surfaces, leaving only faint scorch marks. Power weapons designed to shear through adamantium merely elicited a strange, resonant hum from the crystalline structures, which then seemed to grow larger, drawing more energy from the surrounding population. Captain Rorik, leading the Harvestia deployment, reported back to Chapter Master Varkos with a grim update. "My lord, these Xenos are unlike any we have faced. They are not flesh and blood, but something else. Our standard armaments are ineffective, and their impact on the human populace is insidious. They consume the very essence of human thought and emotion. Our forces suffer from psychic backlash, even without direct contact." Varkos listened, his face a mask of grim determination. This was a challenge to his vision of perfect order, a foe that attacked the mind, that preyed on the very emotional landscape he had sought to suppress, was an affront. He dispatched the chapter's small cadre of librarians, led by Chief Librarian Valerius, to Harvestia. Valerius, a potent psyker, immediately recognized the nature of the threat. The Calathon Scourge were indeed psychic parasites, their crystalline forms acting as nexus points to siphon off the latent psychic energy inherent in all sentient life. The Iron Vigil's policy of rigidly enforced order, which had bred compliance at the cost of suppressed emotions and individuality, had paradoxically created an environment ripe for Calathon exploitation. Billions of desperate, fearful, yet outwardly compliant human minds formed a vast, irresistible psychic beacon. The librarians, shielded by their armor and the training of their discipline, engaged the Calathons on a psychic plane. It was a terrifying, unseen war. Valerius described it as battling against a choir of silent screams, a pervasive hunger that sought to consume all light and reason. Their psychic bolts, however, proved effective where physical weapons failed. The concentrated mental energy of a trained psyker disrupted the crystalline lattice, causing the Calathon constructs to shatter into dust, their energy dissipating harmlessly. This discovery provided a tactical breakthrough, but the scale of the problem was immense. The Iron Vigil possessed only a handful of librarians, far too few to cleanse an entire sector. Furthermore, the act of cleansing a world of Calathons was devastating to the human populace. When the parasitic constructs were destroyed, the psychic energy they had siphoned was released in a chaotic, uncontrolled burst, often leading to mass psychosis, brain death, or gruesome psychic feedback loops that incinerated the minds of those too close to the nexus points. On Harvestia, millions died in the psychic backlash of the Purge, their minds exploding from the sudden release of stolen energy. The surviving population was left even more traumatized and empty than before. The Calathon Scourge, unlike conventional invaders, did not seek to destroy infrastructure or seize territory. They sought only to feed. They moved like an unseen current through the Ethelian reach, drawn to the largest concentrations of human life, silently undermining the Iron Vigil's perfect worlds from within. Worlds where the Iron Vigil had imposed particularly harsh regimes of compliance, thereby creating populations filled with suppressed fear and resentment, became prime targets, their psychic reservoirs overflowing with the bitter energy the Calathons craved. Chapter Master Varkos was forced to confront the grim paradox of his own success. His iron grip on the sector, designed to forge unity, had inadvertently created a vast psychic buffet for these Xenos. He ordered an immediate sector-wide deployment of anti-psychanic countermeasures and the strict monitoring of any unusual mental activity. His chaplains and commissars worked overtime, attempting to root out the fear and disunity that the Calathons fed upon, but their methods were crude, relying on intimidation and suppression, which only intensified the underlying emotional current. The Iron Vigil, A chapter forged in direct martial conflict found itself battling an enemy that could not be punched, shot, or bludgeoned into submission. It was a war of unseen forces, of the spirit and the mind, and it left the Astartes profoundly unsettled. They understood the physical battlefield, the logic of logistics and overwhelming force. But how did one fight a hunger that preyed on despair, an enemy that became stronger the more fearful its victims became? The Calethan scourge became a festering wound in the heart of the Iron Vigil's orderly domain. It was a constant reminder that for all their efforts to control and unify, there were forces in the cosmos that defied their hammer, that mocked their concept of absolute order by turning the very suffering it engendered into sustenance. The pristine, unified sector they had built was now tainted, haunted by a silent, invisible foe that threatened to unravel their grand design, not through open warfare, but through slow, insidious spiritual decay. The shadows in the void had arrived, and they were feeding. The Iron Vigil's rigid imposition of order across the Athelian reach had, by design, eradicated independent leadership, tribal autonomy, and cultural dissent. They believed that by centralizing authority and standardizing thought, they eliminated potential sources of resistance. They were wrong. Suppression, particularly of the human spirit, rarely annihilates. It merely forces it to adapt, to find new channels, new voices. From the broken remnants of 1,000 shattered cultures and the silent resentment of billions of subjugated souls, a new kind of leader emerged, one diametrically opposed to everything the Iron Vigil represented: Kalen, the Unchained. Kalen was not a figure of noble lineage or military prowess in the conventional sense. His origins were humble, born into a family of forced laborers on the factory world of Pharaoh Prime, a world mercilessly restructured by the Iron Vigil into a monotonous high-yield production hub. He had witnessed firsthand the obliteration of his people's ancient craft guilds, their intricate traditions replaced by the soul-crushing rhythm of assembly lines, all in the name of imperial efficiency. He saw the Iron Vigil as not merely conquerors, but as destroyers of identity, butchers of the human spirit. Initially, Kalen was just another nameless cog, his days spent feeding raw ore into roaring furnaces, but within him burned a fierce, defiant spark, an unshakable belief in the inherent right of cultures to exist, of individuals to think freely. He was a natural orator, his voice resonating with an unvarnished sincerity that spoke to the deepest frustrations of the subjugated. He found allies among the dispossessed, former tribal chieftains whose lands had been despoiled, techno-barbarian mechanics whose skills were now repurposed for the Imperium, and even a few minor psychers whose nascent abilities had developed in response to the pervasive dread of the Calethan scourge. Kalen's movement began as whispers in the dark, hushed conversations in the sprawling utilitarian hab blocks after the long shifts. Coded messages passed between planets via encrypted, ancient data networks the Iron Vigil had overlooked or dismissed as too primitive to be a threat. He preached not of galactic rebellion against the Emperor, for even he understood the futility of that, but of cultural defiance, of reclaiming identity, of local autonomy against the crushing uniformity of the Iron Vigil. His message resonated with billions who had lost their gods, their traditions, their very names. He promised not freedom, but dignity. The Iron Vigil, accustomed to direct military threats and easily identifiable enemies, initially struggled to grasp the nature of this burgeoning resistance. Their augurs reported no massed armies, no concentrated rebel fleets. Yet across the sector, acts of defiance began to proliferate. Production quotas would mysteriously drop. Unitorum shipments would be sabotaged, not violently, but subtly, rendering them useless. Propaganda pictcasts would be hacked, their grim messages of unity replaced by fleeting images of ancient Xylosian dances or Viridian folk songs. These acts, though seemingly minor, were a direct assault on the Iron Vigil's meticulously crafted order. Chapter Master Varkos saw these incidents not as simple criminal acts, but as a dangerous resurgence of disunity. He dispatched punitive expeditions, deploying entire companies to crack down on suspected hotbeds of rebellion. But Kalen and his followers were not so easily pinned down. They adopted guerrilla tactics, exploiting the vast, untamed wildernesses that still existed between the Iron Vigil's bastions, and leveraging the sheer size of the compliant populations as a hiding place. Kalen became a phantom, a myth whispered in the shadows. He moved between worlds on repurposed, often derelict civilian transports, always one step ahead of the Astartes. He led daring raids on newly established Imperial supply lines, not to steal resources for himself, but to distribute them amongst the most impoverished and oppressed, creating fierce loyalty among his followers. He established hidden enclaves in asteroid fields, forgotten moon bases, and even within the sprawling, unmonitored underhives of some planets where the Iron Vigil's reach was less pervasive. His most audacious act of defiance occurred on Solara, the world of the former Sunstone Weavers. The Iron Vigil had repurposed a sacred Weaver's temple into a central administratum facility, a clear symbol of their dominion. Kalen, with a small band of followers, infiltrated the facility, not to destroy it, but to reclaim a single ancient sunstone tapestry, a relic of immense cultural significance that depicted the history of the Weavers. They escaped, leaving behind a simple message scrawled in the ancient Solaran script, "We remember." The act itself was a minor one, militarily insignificant, but its symbolic impact rippled across the sector, igniting a flicker of hope and defiance in the hearts of millions. This single act elevated Kalen from a mere dissident to the Unchained, a figure who dared to break the bonds of Iron Vigil uniformity. Chapter Master Varkos, his patience worn thin, declared Kalen an arch-heretic and a clear and present danger to the stability of the Athelian Reach. He assigned Captain Valerius, the chief librarian, to specifically hunt Kalen, believing that the Psyker's unique abilities might be able to track the elusive rebel leader. Valerius, however, found himself increasingly disturbed by the nature of his quarry. Kalen was not a chaos cultist nor a Xenos agent. He was a human, driven by a profound, if misguided, desire for self-determination. The psychic signature he projected was not one of hatred or corruption, but of fierce, desperate hope, mingled with the suppressed anguish of his people. The librarian's pursuit was a grim odyssey, leading him through the shadow-haunted corners of the Athelian Reach, constantly battling the Calathan scourge, even as he hunted Kalen. He witnessed the subtle erosion of humanity, the lingering despair that fueled both the Xenos and the rebel. The conflict became a grim dance between relentless pursuit and elusive evasion. The Iron Vigil would deploy a strike force to a suspected Kalen stronghold, only to find it deserted, save for a few symbolic acts of defiance. A defaced Imperial aquila, a hidden cache of ancient cultural artifacts, a single defiant flower growing from a crack in a ceramite wall. Kalen became a master of misdirection, using the very immensity of the sector and the burgeoning fear of the Calethan scourge to his advantage, often leading the Astartes into carefully prepared ambushes that, while rarely inflicting significant casualties on the Battle Brothers, served to further deplete their resources and wear down their resolve. The existence of Kalen, the Unchained, was a festering wound in the Iron Vigil's carefully constructed unity. He represented everything they had sought to eradicate: individuality, cultural identity, and the stubborn, unyielding human spirit that refused to be broken. He was a living symbol of disunity, and as long as he breathed, the Iron Vigil's vision of a perfectly ordered Athelian Reach remained incomplete, a fragile facade over a simmering rebellion. He was their arch-nemesis, not because he wielded great power, but because he embodied the very principle they sought to extinguish. He was the chaotic spark in their perfect machine, and the Iron Vigil would stop at nothing to extinguish it. The relentless grind of the Athelian Reach campaign, a crusade waged not merely against external foes, but against the very essence of human individuality, began to exact a subtle but profound toll on the Iron Vigil. While their resolve remained unbroken, the sheer human cost of their enlightened conquest and the increasingly desperate nature of their foes, both Kalen's rebels and the insidious Calethan scourge, began to manifest as an internal ideological strain. It was not open heresy nor overt rebellion, but a quiet, almost imperceptible fraying at the edges of their absolute conviction, particularly among the junior ranks. The Astartes of the Iron Vigil were forged in a crucible of extreme discipline and absolute ideological purity. Their indoctrination had been thorough, their training brutal, designed to instill unwavering loyalty to the Emperor and the chapter's core tenet of absolute unity. Yet they were still human, or at least they had once been. The gene seed might suppress empathy and foster grim resolve, but it could not entirely erase the innate capacity for observation and, for some, quiet reflection. For the veteran battle brothers, those who had seen countless worlds fall and had personally wielded the great architect's hammer, the casualties and the obliteration of cultures were merely necessary sacrifices. They had witnessed true galactic horror, and their conviction that absolute unity was the sole path to survival was absolute. Chapter Master Solon Varkos, in particular, was beyond doubt. His soul hardened into an unyielding monolith of purpose. He saw the suffering as a temporary, regrettable, but ultimately insignificant price for humanity's eternal salvation. However, the younger Astartes, those who had been raised primarily within the controlled environment of the Iron Vigil's rapidly expanding dominion, often found themselves grappling with disturbing cognitive dissonance. They were told of the Emperor's beneficence, of the Imperium's glorious purpose, yet they saw only worlds reduced to uniform gray, populations devoid of joy, their traditions replaced by the weary rhythm of mandated labor. They witnessed the brutal suppression of what, to their unsullied minds, often appeared as harmless cultural expressions, not insidious disunity. A vivid example of this internal friction occurred during the pacification of the world of Lyra Nind, a minor agricultural hub recently tainted by Calathon's psychic bleed. The Iron Vigil's protocols demanded not only the psychic cleansing of the world, but also the removal of all unique identifiers for the surviving populace. This included the prohibition of intricate, brightly colored garments that were traditional to the Lyran people, replaced by drab, gray Imperial work robes. Brother Sergeant Kalis, a young leader of a tactical squad, observed the scene. He watched as Imperial enforcers, under the supervision of a stern Iron Vigil chaplain, ripped the traditional fabrics from crying children and distraught adults. He saw the flicker of ancient defiance in their eyes, quickly extinguished by fear. His training screamed that this was necessary, that distinct clothing could foster unique identity, which could lead to factions, which could lead to disunity. But a suppressed part of his psyche, a ghost of his pre-Astartes humanity, whispered, "What harm is there in a colorful cloth?" He did not speak his thoughts, for such vocalization was anathema, a sign of weakness. But the seed of doubt was planted. He had seen the Calathon scourge, had felt their insidious psychic hunger, and understood the threat. Yet he also saw the direct, tangible despair his chapter caused, a despair that the librarians had confirmed only made the Calathon stronger. This grim paradox began to gnaw at the edges of his conviction. The chaplains of the Iron Vigil were hyper-vigilant against such insidious doubts. Their role was not merely to maintain faith, but to enforce doctrinal purity with an unyielding hand. Any Astartes exhibiting signs of sentimentality or philosophical deviation was immediately subjected to intense re-indoctrination, often involving weeks of solitary contemplation in purification cells, exposure to propaganda-riddled pictorials depicting the horrors of disunity, and, in extreme cases, autoflagellation rituals. For the Iron Vigil, an Astartes mind was a weapon, and it had to be perfectly sharpened and aimed. The greatest source of internal strain, ironically, came from Kalen, the Unchained. The tactical reports of his evasion, his ability to rally the dispossessed, and the sheer tenacity of his followers resonated differently with some of the younger battle brothers. They were taught to respect a worthy foe, to acknowledge strength and ingenuity. Kalen, though an enemy, displayed these traits in abundance, fighting not for conquest, but for the very things the Iron Vigil systematically destroyed. Some Astartes, in the dark corners of their minds, found themselves begrudgingly admiring Kalen's spirit, even as they sought to crush him. Brother Zathos, a scout marine whose duties frequently took him deep into the untamed regions of newly pacified worlds, encountered remnants of Kalen's network on a desolate moon. He found a hidden cache of ancient texts, salvaged from a world the Iron Vigil had unified. These were not heretical grimoires, but poetry, historical accounts, and philosophical treatises of cultures now extinct. Zathos, instructed to destroy all such relics, found himself pausing. He could not read the scripts, but the sheer volume of human endeavor, painstakingly preserved by Kalen's rebels, spoke to a resilience he had not fully appreciated. He reported the cache, of course, and it was purged, but the image of those dusty, defiant scrolls lingered. The leadership of the chapter, primarily Chapter Master Varkos, Chief Librarian Valerius, and the 10 company captains, remained unyielding. They were the architects the prime movers, and their vision was absolute. Any internal debate was dismissed as a weakness, a dangerous sliver of disunity that had to be excised immediately. They saw the human cost as an unavoidable byproduct of a cosmic imperative. Their enlightened conquest was, in their minds, a mercy, however brutal. They were saving humanity from itself, one broken world at a time. Yet, the questions lingered, unspoken, in the silent, hardened hearts of some Astartes. Was a unified corpse truly preferable to a vibrant, if fractious, life? Did ultimate order justify the complete erasure of identity? These were dangerous thoughts, bordering on heresy in the Iron Vigil. They were ruthlessly suppressed, but suppression was not eradication. The weight of compliance, the burden of their grim crusade, was heavier than any ceramite plate, and it pressed down upon their souls, threatening to crack the perfect, unified facade from within. The Iron Vigil was a hammer, but even a hammer used relentlessly can begin to chip and crack at its own edges. The hunt for Kalen, the Unchained, stretched into years, becoming a pervasive, irritating itch in the otherwise perfectly ordered fabric of the Iron Vigil's domain. He was a constant defiant symbol, and Chapter Master Solon Varkos understood that, as long as Kalen lived, the Athelian reach would never be truly unified. The arch-heretic's elimination became a paramount objective, a cleansing fire necessary to purify the sector entirely. The climax of this relentless pursuit came on the Argus Belt, a sprawling anarchic cluster of asteroid colonies and derelict space stations nestled in a distant, mineral-rich system, a haven for smugglers, rogue prospectors, and, as it turned out, the last significant bastion of Kalen's forces. The Argus Belt was a nightmare for any organized military. Thousands of small, heavily shielded asteroids, interconnected by fragile, makeshift docking tubes and riddled with countless hidden chambers, offered a labyrinthine environment perfectly suited for guerrilla warfare. Kalen, leveraging his intimate knowledge of the sector's forgotten corners and his network of dispossessed followers, had gathered a considerable force there. Desperate fighters from a dozen worlds, cultists of unity-defying ideologies, and even some cunning Xenos scavengers drawn by the promise of chaos. The Iron Vigil, under the direct command of Chapter Master Varkos, committed a substantial portion of its fleet and ground forces. Strike cruisers led by the unifying Truth established a blockade, their sensor arrays meticulously scanning every rock and void lane. Companies of Astartes, supported by regiments of newly raised Imperial Guard from Xylos Prime and Viridia Tertius, began the grim, systematic process of asteroid by asteroid clearance. It was a brutal, claustrophobic war fought in vacuum and recycled air, through cramped corridors and exposed, freezing void lanes. Kalen's forces, though numerically inferior and less well-equipped, fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They booby-trapped access tunnels, detonated void mines, and launched suicide attacks in repurposed mining vessels, ramming the Iron Vigil's smaller frigates. They knew the belt intimately, using its treacherous asteroid fields to perform sudden, devastating ambushes before melting back into the darkness. The Iron Vigil, for the first time in their campaign, found themselves suffering significant attrition. Casualties mounted among the Imperial Guard, and even the Astartes, though rarely killed, were frequently wounded, their ceramites scarred by laser fire and shrapnel. Chapter Master Varkos, observing the protracted and costly nature of the engagement, grew increasingly impatient. He saw Kalen's stubborn resistance not as a testament to human spirit, but as an intolerable affront to order, a cancerous growth that threatened to metastasize, if not surgically removed, with utmost prejudice. His frustration was compounded by reports of Calithan incursions on other worlds, their parasitic hunger subtly intensifying as the conflict on the Argus Belt created a storm of psychic distress. The prolonged war on the belt was diverting vital resources and attention from the insidious Xenos threat. He made a decision that would forever stain the Iron Vigil's already grim reputation, even within the context of the 41st millennium's brutality. He ordered the systematic orbital bombardment of every asteroid and station that offered sustained resistance. His fleet's powerful lances and macro-cannons, hitherto used with a degree of restraint to preserve infrastructure for Imperial use, were unleashed with cold, calculated fury. The devastation was absolute. Asteroid colonies, home to millions of civilians, collapsed into fiery wreckage. Habitation modules, filled with Kalen's loyalists and countless innocent families, detonated in silent explosions that sent debris fields spiraling into the void. The very rock of the Argus Belt began to shatter, fragments colliding violently, forming a new chaotic debris cloud that screamed through the system. From the safety of the vanguard of Solon, the Astartes watched as entire ecosystems, carefully cultivated within biodomes, vented into the void, snuffing out untold lives in an instant. "There can be no sanctuary for disunity," Varkos stated, his voice calm, devoid of triumph or regret, as he watched a picked feed of a distant asteroid blossoming into a silent nova. "Only absolute compliance or absolute obliteration." The orbital purge continued for days, reducing the once thriving Argus Belt to a desolate, lifeless expanse of shattered rock and frozen debris. The last pocket of Kalen's resistance was cornered on Argus Station Prime, the largest and most heavily fortified of the colonies. Kalen himself, grim-faced and defiant to the end, made his last stand in the station's Central Command nexus, surrounded by his most loyal followers. Captain Lyris, leading a Terminator assault, breached the command nexus. The battle was a brutal, desperate melee. Kalen, surprisingly agile, wielded a repurposed power claw, a relic from a forgotten age, fighting with a ferocity that matched even the Astartes. He inflicted deep gouges on Terminator armor, his eyes burning with the fires of righteous indignation. But he was only one man, however charismatic, against the unstoppable might of the Emperor's Angels of Death. Lyris met Kalen's charge with the thunderous impact of his hammer. The power claw shattered against the ceramite pauldron, but not before Kalen's counterstrike found a weak point in Lyris's armor, piercing his gorget plate. The captain roared, ignoring the wound, and brought his hammer down with a final crushing blow. Kalen's resistance ended in a spray of blood and shattered bone, his body obliterated, his defiant spirit finally extinguished. The Iron Vigil had achieved their objective. Kalen the Unchained was dead. His network was shattered, his followers either annihilated or scattered to the wind, devoid of their charismatic leader. The Athelian Reach was once again superficially unified, but the victory was a Pyrrhic one. The Argus Belt, once a vibrant hub of human activity, was now a tomb, a testament to the brutal price of absolute compliance. Billions of lives had been extinguished, not by Xenos, but by the very guardians of humanity. The sheer scale of the destruction left an indelible mark on the Astartes. Even the most hardened veterans felt the weight of that silence, the vast, cold emptiness of what they had wrought. The grim utilitarianism of their doctrine had demanded the eradication of a threat, and they had delivered it, but at a cost that resonated even in the deepest recesses of their modified minds. The psychic echoes of the Argus devastation, the unimaginable suffering and instantaneous deaths of billions, sent a massive, uncontrolled wave of psychic energy through the sector. The Calithan Scourge, ever opportunistic, gorged themselves on this raw, uncontrolled psychic outburst, consolidating their power, growing larger and more insidious on dozens of unsuspecting worlds. The Iron Vigil, in their single-minded pursuit of Kalen, had inadvertently fed the very alien horror that threatened their entire domain. The Iron Vigil had won. Kalen was gone. But the Argus devastation became a chilling monument not to their glory, but to the devastating, dehumanizing cost of their absolute, unwavering vision of unity. It was a victory, yes, but one that left the chapter scarred, their souls a little colder, and their perfectly ordered sector a little more broken. The hammer had crushed the dissent, but it had also cracked the foundation. The aftermath of the Argus devastation cast a long, cold shadow over the Iron Vigil. The systematic obliteration of the belt had silenced Kalen, but the cost had been staggering, a raw wound on the sector's already strained soul. In the grim period that followed, as the chapter sought to reassert its absolute control and address the burgeoning Calithan threat, fate, in its cruel indifference, chose to unveil a fragment of truth about their own genesis, a revelation that subtly, yet profoundly, validated their extreme methods in the minds of Chapter Master Varkos and his inner circle. The discovery occurred not through deliberate search, but by chance, during a routine patrol of the sector's outer fringe. A scout vessel, the Truth Seeker, stumbled upon a derelict space hulk, an agglomeration of countless vessels, ancient and modern, twisted together by warp storms into a monstrous drifting graveyard. Its energy signatures were faint but persistent, suggesting dormant systems or perhaps something more. Standard protocol dictated a thorough sweep for Xenos infestation or potential archaeological salvage. A detachment from the 7th Company, led by Brother Sergeant Kalis, still grappling with the unspoken doubts ignited by the Argus devastation, boarded the hulking derelict. The interior was a nightmare of tangled wiring, rusted bulkheads, and the chilling silence of countless forgotten dead. The air was stale, laced with the scent of ozone and decay. They battled minor infestations of mutated fauna and pockets of reanimated corpses, grim hazards typical of such vessels. Deep within the hulk's rotting bowels, they discovered a section of unusual construction. It was an ancient pre-Imperial cruiser, encased within the larger mass, its design unfamiliar, yet bearing the unmistakable archaic iconography of a magos biologist. Its interior, remarkably preserved by stasis fields that had flickered on and off for millennia, was a sealed, pristine laboratory. Within, amidst banks of archaic data slates and bubbling stasis tanks that hummed with long-dormant life, the Astartes found their prize, a vast encrypted data core. Tech Marine Boren, his internal cogitators whirring with anticipation, labored for days to bypass the security protocols, his bionic fingers dancing across ancient consoles. When the core finally yielded its secrets, it did so with a flood of information that resonated directly with the very essence of the Iron Vigil. The data slates detailed the work of a highly unorthodox, long-dead Imperial magos biologist named Kyrus, a reclusive genius from a forgotten Forge world. Magos Kyrus had been obsessed with the concept of genetic perfectibility, specifically focused on eliminating what he perceived as the inherent flaws in humanity's genetic code, particularly the tendencies towards rebellion, disunity, and emotional instability. He believed these traits were vulnerabilities that threatened mankind's long-term survival in a hostile world galaxy. The records detailed Kyrus's experimental gene seed lines, meticulously engineered to foster extreme obedience, unwavering loyalty to hierarchical authority, and an almost obsessive focus on specific directives. His ultimate goal was to create a strain of Astartes utterly devoid of personal ambition, artistic inclination, or emotional attachment that could distract from their primary function. He aimed to engineer a warrior who would serve as a perfectly compliant tool, an unyielding hand of imperial will, free from the weaknesses of individuality. The Iron Vigil's gene seed, the data revealed, was one of Magos Kyrus's most successful, albeit unapproved, experimental lines. It was a genetic template designed for absolute compliance and unified execution. The records did not explicitly name the Iron Vigil, but the descriptions of the engineered behavioral traits, the predisposition towards order, and the ruthless efficiency in task completion were undeniably their own. The Magos' notes even touched upon specific physiological markers that perfectly matched those observed in the Iron Vigil's apothecaries during the chapter's own nascent founding. Brother Sergeant Kalis, despite his earlier doubts, found himself in a strange quandary. The revelation was disturbing. To be revealed as the product of an unapproved genetic experiment, a mere tool forged for a specific purpose, was profoundly unsettling. Yet, the Magos' notes, in their cold, scientific logic, articulated the very philosophy that underpinned the Iron Vigil. Kyrus' arguments about the necessity of unity, of purging disunity for survival, mirrored Chapter Master Varkos' sermons with chilling precision. The Magos had foreseen the very problems the Iron Vigil now faced: human division, external threats, and had engineered a solution. The implications were not lost on Kalis, nor on the other Astartes who received the initial report. They were not merely space marines. They were, by genetic design, the living embodiment of the Iron Vigil's doctrine. Their purpose was ingrained in their very being, a cosmic justification for their brutal methods. When the full findings were presented to Chapter Master Varkos, his reaction was not one of shock, but of grim, quiet affirmation. He locked himself in his chambers for days, studying the ancient data slates, cross-referencing them with the chapter's own internal records, piecing together the fragmented history. The whispers of the cursed founding, the lingering doubts about their peculiar temperament, suddenly coalesced into a terrifying yet profoundly validating truth. "We are not merely chosen," Varkos declared in a private assembly with his captains and chief librarian Valerius, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "We are designed. We are the Emperor's ultimate solution to the cancer of disunity, perfected by a visionaire who saw the truth long before it became apparent to lesser men. Our path is not merely righteous. It is preordained, inscribed in our very genetic code. The sacrifices, the purges, the absolute subjugation of the individual for the collective. This is not merely our doctrine, it is our destiny. The revelation served to steel the chapter's resolve, especially among the wavering ranks. It eliminated any lingering internal strife, replacing doubt with a terrible, unshakable conviction. They were not just following a grim ideology, they were fulfilling their genetic imperative. The brutal methods they employed, the wholesale cultural eradication, the Argus devastation itself, these were not aberrations, but the logical, intended outcome of their very existence. For Chapter Master Solon Varkos, it was the ultimate justification. He had always believed in the necessity of his actions, but now he had scientific, empirical proof that their very gene seed was crafted for this singular purpose. Their obsession with unity was not a flaw, but a perfected trait, a genetic inheritance. The grim, cold logic of Magos Kairos, echoing from millennia past, resonated deeply with the Iron Vigil's present crusade. They were the designated architects, the great architect's hammer, specifically engineered to forge a perfectly unified humanity, no matter the cost. The discovery did not soften them, it hardened them further, making them an even more terrifyingly efficient instrument of absolute compliance. The past had spoken, and it had validated their present brutality. The revelation of their gene seed's origins, while profoundly validating to Chapter Master Varkos and his inner circle, had been a grim, cerebral triumph. It had cemented their philosophical conviction, but it offered no tangible tools for the immediate challenges facing the Athelian Reach. The sector, while unified by force, remained scarred by the Argus devastation, and was now grappling with the escalating, insidious threat of the Calithan Scourge. What the Iron Vigil desperately needed was something concrete, something that could accelerate their vision of a truly productive, unified Imperium, and prove the tangible benefits of their enforced order to a populace teetering on the edge of utter despair. The universe, in its usual grim irony, provided such a tool, albeit in a form as ancient and perilous as any relic of the age of technology. The discovery was made not by the Iron Vigil, but by a detachment of their attached Adeptus Mechanicus forces, deep within the forgotten archives of a once populous Imperial city on Xylos Prime. The city, which had suffered significant damage during the initial pacification, was undergoing extensive reconstruction, its ancient underhives being systematically purged and repurposed. Tech priest Dominus Cygnus died. Cistas 9, a grizzled veteran of the Martian cult, was supervising the salvage operations, driven by a tireless hunger for lost knowledge. Beneath layers of compacted rubble and millennia of accumulated dust, shielded by a perfectly preserved stasis field, they unearthed a complete standard template construct, or STC, fragment. It was not a weapon, nor a piece of advanced armor, but a schema for an automated environmental reclaimer and resource harmonizer. In layman's terms, it was a hyper-efficient terraforming and resource extraction system designed to rapidly transform even inhospitable worlds into productive assets and to optimize existing planetary resources with unprecedented precision and minimal waste. This was no ordinary STC fragment. Unlike the common partial discoveries, this was a fully functional, self-contained data slate containing comprehensive blueprints and operational protocols. It promised to revolutionize agricultural yields, expedite mineral extraction, and even mitigate the effects of environmental degradation on worlds devastated by conflict or neglect. For the Athelian Reach, a sector still reeling from the Iron Vigil's brutal campaigns and plagued by the logistical strain of feeding billions of newly compliant citizens, this was nothing short of a miracle. Dominus Cygnus 9, in a rare display of emotion, immediately presented the find to Chapter Master Solon Varkos. "My lord Chapter Master, his vocoder rasped, the excitement barely contained. This is a triumph, a true gift from the Omnicia. This STC will allow us to reclaim worlds, to feed billions, to forge the very planets into efficient cogs of the Imperium with unparalleled speed." Varkos, ever pragmatic, saw beyond the immediate technological marvel. He saw the strategic implications, the profound validation it offered for his chapter's philosophy. "This fragment," he stated, his voice a low rumble, "is not merely a tool for production. It is a tool for unity. It is the tangible proof that our enlightened conquest provides. The STC fragment was immediately taken to the vanguard of Solon for meticulous study and replication. The tech marines of the Iron Vigil, working in conjunction with Cygnus IX's Mechanicus adepts, toiled tirelessly. Within months, the first prototypes of the automated environmental reclaimers were being deployed. Their impact was instantaneous and transformative. On worlds that had struggled with barren soil or depleted mines, the reclaimers, massive automated vehicles that burrowed deep into the planetary crust or scoured the surface with sophisticated atmospheric processors, began to churn out results. Agricultural worlds saw their yields increase tenfold, ensuring bountiful harvests for populations that had previously known only famine. Mining worlds, stripped bare by centuries of inefficient extraction, suddenly offered up rich veins of ore, meticulously siphoned from the depths. Even worlds devastated by the Iron Vigil's own bombardments, like the shattered remnants of the Argus Belt, though too damaged for full recovery, saw limited targeted reclamation efforts begin to yield precious minerals from the debris. The psychological impact on the compliant human populations was immense. For years, they had known only the crushing weight of the Iron Vigil's authority, the ceaseless demand for tithes, the violent suppression of their identities. They had seen their worlds bled for the Imperium, but now, for the first time, they saw tangible benefits. The sudden abundance of food, the provision of better, though still utilitarian, housing, the reliable flow of raw materials for their burgeoning manufactories, these were undeniable improvements to their daily lives. The relic of unity, as the Iron Vigil quickly termed the STC, became the physical embodiment of their grim promise. Propaganda pictcasts carefully crafted by the chapter's logistars now blared messages of prosperity and security under the Iron Vigil's rule. "The Emperor provides through the architects of unity" was a common refrain, accompanied by images of massive, efficient reclaimers transforming landscapes and smiling, carefully selected citizens enjoying their newfound abundance. The Iron Vigil did not allow gratitude to manifest as individual celebration. Rather, it was directed towards the collective, towards the Emperor, and towards the undeniable benefits of absolute sector-wide unity. The STC fragment also offered a powerful counter-narrative to Kaelin's lingering legacy. While Kaelin had fought for dignity and cultural preservation, the Iron Vigil now offered practical material salvation. For a populace weary of war and yearning for stability, even a grim, enforced stability, the choice became increasingly clear. The rebel whispers, already dampened by Kaelin's demise, grew even fainter in the face of full bellies and secure hab blocks. However, the STC's benefits were not without their own dark undertones. The Iron Vigil's application of the technology was as ruthless as their military campaigns. While it brought abundance, it also brought unprecedented levels of control. The reclaimers were integrated into a centralized network, their operations dictated by the vanguard of Solon. Production targets were set with unyielding precision, labor quotas enforced with renewed vigor. The environment, now optimized for maximum output, lost even more of its natural beauty, replaced by perfectly gridded agricultural zones and stark, efficient mining complexes. The aesthetic of the Athelian Reach became one of absolute utility, a landscape of straight lines and functional structures, devoid of any natural irregularity or individual charm. The Calethan Scourge remained a persistent, if now less immediately pressing, problem. The STC, being a purely technological solution, did nothing to address the psychic parasitism. In fact, by creating a more populous, more stressed, and still spiritually drained populace, it inadvertently ensured a larger, more stable feeding ground for the insidious Xenos. But for the Iron Vigil, the immediate, tangible benefits of the Relic of Unity outweighed this abstract threat. The discovery of the STC fragment solidified the Iron Vigil's grip on the Athelian Reach, offering a chilling form of hope to its compliant populations. It proved, to the chapter master's satisfaction, that absolute unity, however achieved, led to tangible progress and survival. It allowed them to build their ordered sector, brick by bloody brick, now with the added efficiency of an ancient miraculous technology. The Athelian Reach was not just pacified, it was being meticulously redesigned, reshaped, and refined into the ultimate manifestation of the Iron Vigil's grim vision. A perfectly productive, perfectly ordered, and perfectly soulless cog in the machine of the Imperium. Years bled into decades, marked by the relentless hum of the automated environmental reclaimers and the silent, unyielding presence of the Iron Vigil. The Athelian Reach, once a vibrant, fractious tapestry of human cultures, was now a portrait of uniform, rigid efficiency. The great architect's hammer had wrought a profound transformation, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered, a society meticulously structured, and a populace utterly compliant. This period of sustained, brutal order, which the Iron Vigil termed the Long War Against Disunity, solidified their domain, but also etched deep psychological scars onto the chapter itself. The worlds of the Athelian Reach became grim monuments to the Iron Vigil's doctrine. Sprawling megacities built with a utilitarian aesthetic rose from the ruins of ancient settlements. Their towering hab blocks housed billions, meticulously managed and assigned to their allocated tasks. Vast agricultural plains, geometrically perfect and endlessly productive thanks to the STC fragment, stretched to the horizon, tended by automated drones and an endless supply of human laborers, their lives a ceaseless cycle of regulated toil. Mining operations burrowed deep into planetary crusts, extracting resources with unparalleled efficiency, feeding the sector's burgeoning manufactorums. The sector was unified, yes. Travel was safe, communication networks were robust, and basic needs like food and shelter were met. Crime was almost non-existent, swiftly and brutally suppressed by the omnipresent enforcers and the looming threat of the Iron Vigil. Public order was absolute. Yet, this order came at an unimaginable cost. The unique cultural identities of 1,000 worlds had been systematically erased, deemed unnecessary and potentially divisive. Art, music, literature, unless it was imperial dogma, had been largely eradicated, replaced by hymns to the emperor and propaganda celebrating the virtues of unity and sacrifice. Individuality was a forgotten concept, replaced by the collective. The human populations of the Athelian Reach were, by and large, physically secure and materially provided for, but they were spiritually broken. Their faces, captured on routine surveillance pict feeds, were often devoid of true emotion, etched with a quiet resignation. They lived, they worked, they obeyed, but the spark of genuine joy, of independent thought, of vibrant life, had been systematically extinguished. Their cultures were gone, their history rewritten, their very purpose distilled to serving the Imperium as perfectly ordered components. The Iron Vigil had successfully eradicated disunity, but in doing so, they had also purged much of what it meant to be human. For the Iron Vigil themselves, the Long War was an endless, draining endeavor. They were not merely warriors, they were administrators, engineers, cultural purgers, and eternal sentinels. Their training, designed for martial conflict, was now applied to the meticulous oversight of entire planetary systems. Chapter Master Solon Varkos spent less time leading from the front and more time in the vast, data-choked command crypts of the vanguard of Solon, overseeing production quotas, suppressing nascent psychic flurries that fed the Calithan scourge, and meticulously planning the further expansion and integration of the sector. The Astartes of the Iron Vigil became more machine-like in their dedication. Their already austere personalities grew even colder, their focus narrowed to an almost monomaniacal intensity. Their interactions with the human populace were purely functional, devoid of empathy or understanding. They saw the humans not as individuals, but as masses, as resources, as components of the greater machine. The subtle internal ideological strains that had emerged in earlier years were now almost entirely gone, replaced by a grim, shared conviction that their path, however brutal, was the only one. The genetic predisposition to order, once a subtle trait, had solidified into an unshakable, almost pathological compulsion. The chapter's tactical doctrine also evolved. While still masters of direct assault, they became equally adept at counterinsurgency on a grand scale, at rooting out any whisper of rebellion, any flicker of uncontrolled psychic energy. Their librarians, once a small cadre, became indispensable, constantly patrolling the sector's psychic space, hunting the insidious Calithan scourge, whose presence remained a persistent, if now contained, threat. The more the population's collective despair and enforced resignation grew, the more the Calithans thrived in the background, feeding on the quiet anguish of billions. It was a vicious cycle, The Iron Vigil's order created the psychic climate for the Calathans, and the Calathans' presence further justified the Iron Vigil's harsh methods. Even the vanguard of Solon, once a brutal instrument of conquest, transformed into a multi-purpose command and control hub, its vast decks housing not just battle-ready companies, but extensive administrative cadres, vast databanks, and sophisticated sensor arrays that monitored every facet of the Athelian Reach. It was the nerve center of their grim empire, an unblinking eye watching over its perfectly ordered, perfectly silent domain. The Iron Vigil had achieved their initial goal. The Athelian Reach was unified. It was a beacon of order and efficiency, a testament to what could be accomplished when individuality and dissent were ruthlessly purged. No Xenos threat had been allowed to gain a foothold beyond the Calathans, who remained an enduring abstract horror rather than an overt military invasion. No human civil war erupted. Every world contributed to the Imperium's tithe. But the price for this stability was the very soul of the sector. The Athelian Reach, once diverse and vibrant, was now a cold, efficient machine. The Iron Vigil, once driven by a grim ideal, had become its embodiment, unyielding, emotionless, and utterly terrifying in its unwavering commitment to an order that seemed to drain the very life from humanity. They had built a bulwark against chaos, but in doing so, they had created a kind of stillness, a profound, chilling silence that bordered on death itself. The scars of order were deep, both on the face of the sector and in the hardened hearts of the Space Marines who had imposed it. This was the long war's grim conclusion, a victory of absolute unity, purchased at the cost of everything humanity held dear, leaving a realm of perfect, despondent compliance. The Tyranid tendril had receded, its monstrous hunger sated for now. The Athelian Reach had been saved, but the aftermath was a tableau of utter devastation, a silent, broken testament to the astronomical cost of their survival. The unification protocol, the Iron Vigil's ultimate expression of enforced order, had worked, but it had left the sector a death-spoiled husk, a grim shadow of its already grim past. This was the crushing silence after the storm, the hollow echo of a victory bought with the lives of billions and the soul of an entire sector. From the bridge of the vanguard of Solon, Chapter Master Solon Varkos surveyed the holographic map. Where once vibrant blue and green nodes had indicated populated worlds, now most glowed a sickly crimson, signifying dead planets, sterile and lifeless. The few remaining viable worlds were scarred beyond recognition, their surfaces churned into craters, their once thriving cities reduced to shattered ruins. The air, even on the flagship, was heavy with the tangible weight of loss. The Iron Vigil themselves were a fraction of their former strength. Their companies, once numbering 1,000 battle brothers, were now mere platoons, decimated by the relentless, all-consuming tide of the great devourer. Captain Lyris, his thunderhammer scarred and chipped, oversaw the recovery of Geneseed from the fallen, a silent, grim ritual. He moved with a heavy weariness that even his augmented physiology could not entirely suppress. Brother Sergeant Kalis, a veteran of countless brutal engagements, carried the unburdening silence of a warrior who had seen too much, fought too long, and lost too much to truly feel anything beyond grim purpose. The Imperial Guard regiments, once numbering in the millions, were all but annihilated. The conscripted militias, largely untrained and poorly equipped, had been utterly consumed, their sacrifices merely speed bumps against the Tyranid advance. Billions of human lives, the very populace the Iron Vigil had so ruthlessly unified, had been extinguished in the fires of the Tyranid war. Entire worlds, once productive cogs in the Iron Vigil's machine, now drifted silently through the void, stripped of all biomass, barren and cold. The most profound impact was felt by the surviving populations. Scattered across the remaining habitable worlds, these remnants were truly broken. They were physically exhausted, mentally traumatized, and spiritually empty. They had witnessed unimaginable horrors, sacrificed loved ones, and fought to the bitter end, not for an ideal, but for mere survival, driven by the absolute, unyielding will of the Iron Vigil. Their cultures were not just suppressed, they were eradicated. Their individual identities were not just erased, they were incinerated in the furnace of war. What remained was a collective, shell-shocked mass, devoid of hope, devoid of joy, existing purely to serve the grim purpose that had saved them. The Athelian Reach, once a backwater, then a meticulously ordered sector, was now a wasteland, held together by the shattered remnants of the Iron Vigil. The relic of unity, The STC fragment continued to function, its automated reclaimers slowly and painstakingly beginning the process of reestablishing basic infrastructure on the few worlds still capable of sustaining life. But the efficiency now felt grotesque, a mechanical mockery of the life it was meant to sustain. The Calathan scourge, though overshadowed by the Tyranid horror, remained. Indeed, they had thrived on the immense psychic maelstrom generated by the deaths of billions. Chief Librarian Valerius, now a wraith of his former self, his mind seared by the constant psychic warfare against both the Tyranids and the insidious Calathan hunger, confirmed that the crystalline parasites had reached unprecedented levels of infestation on the surviving worlds. They fed on the pervasive despair and emptiness, becoming stronger, more deeply entrenched in the collective psyche of the broken populace. The Iron Vigil had saved the sector from one devourer, only to leave it more vulnerable to another. Chapter Master Varkos, though physically unharmed, bore the scars of the war in his soul, though he would never admit it. His face, when seen, was gaunt, his eyes darker, deeper, reflecting the cold abyss he had stared into. He had achieved his grim purpose. The sector was unified. It was a single, unyielding entity, its every resource, every surviving life devoted to the Imperium. But it was a unity forged in blood and despair, a victory so absolute it felt indistinguishable from defeat. He addressed his surviving forces in a cold, silent ceremony within the scarred hangar of the vanguard of Solon. "We have endured," his vox-amplified voice echoed through the vast, empty space. "We have paid the price. The great devourer has turned its gaze elsewhere. This sector stands, a monument to our unyielding will, a testament to the absolute necessity of unity. The cost was high, brothers, but the alternative was annihilation. We have purchased humanity's survival, however grim, for another day." There was no cheering, no triumph, only the grim, silent acknowledgement of warriors who had fought a war they barely survived for a victory that offered no comfort. The Athelian Reach, saved by the Iron Vigil, was now a ghost sector, its future one of endless, arduous rebuilding under the unblinking iron gaze of a chapter that had traded its own soul for the grim certainty of survival. They had paid the price of absolute unity, and the coin was blood and despair. The sector was safe, but it was a quiet, empty kind of safe, a mausoleum of forced compliance. The Athelian Reach, a sector once teeming with diverse human cultures, now existed as a stark, haunting monument to the Iron Vigil's doctrine of absolute unity. Crippled but unyielding, the chapter continued its grim vigil over the desolated expanse, its presence a chilling testament to the lengths humanity would go for survival and order. Theirs was a tragic legacy, an example of a noble ideal warped by the grim realities of the 41st millennium, forever etched in the annals of a brutal Imperium. The Iron Vigil, reduced to perhaps a mere 200 battle brothers, found itself fundamentally altered by the Tyranid War. Their once sprawling chapter was now concentrated, its few remaining Astartes hardened into even more efficient, more detached instruments of Imperial will. Chapter Master Solon Varkos, now even more gaunt and silent, presided over a dominion that was little more than a collective wound, a single vast scar on the face of the galaxy. Yet, in his mind, their core purpose had been irrevocably validated. The unification protocol, though devastating, had worked. Disunity would have seen them devoured. Unity, however brutal, had ensured survival. The surviving worlds of the Athelian Reach were painstakingly being rebuilt, not with any sense of hope or cultural restoration, but with a renewed, grim efficiency. The automated environmental reclaimers toiled endlessly, terraforming blighted landscapes, their efforts directed by the few remaining tech marines and a cadre of heavily augmented servitors. New hab blocks, even more utilitarian and devoid of individuality than before, were constructed. The populations, reduced to a fraction of their pre-war numbers, lived in a state of enforced collective quietude, their lives dictated by rigorous schedules and constant surveillance. There were no riots, no rebellions, no dissent. There was only obedience, born of profound exhaustion and the omnipresent threat of the Iron Vigil. The Calathan scourge, too, became an enduring part of the sector's scarred landscape. Having fed on the psychic maelstrom of the Tyranid invasion, they were now an ever-present, insidious threat on every inhabited world. Chief Librarian Valerius, his mind a constant battleground against the Xenos' psychic hunger, found himself leading his few remaining librarians in an endless, draining war of attrition against the crystalline parasites. The Iron Vigil learned to manage the Calathans, not eradicate them. They established psychic dampeners in population centers, conducted regular, localized psychic purges at further cost to the human mind, and enforced strict emotional suppression protocols, knowing that any resurgence of collective fear or despair would only strengthen the Xenos. It was a grim stalemate, a testament to the fact that even in their perfect order, chaos in another form would always find a way to fester. The Iron Vigil continued its work, not as saviors or heroes, but as unyielding enforcers of a merciless truth. They were the cold logic of survival personified. They had delivered the Emperor's peace, not as a choice, but as an inevitability, forging a unified sector out of blood, despair, and the shattered fragments of human identity. Their methods were horrifically effective, a testament to the extreme measures that a dying Imperium might find itself forced to employ. In the wider Imperium, the fate of the Athelian Reach became a matter of quiet bureaucratic record. A pacified sector, its tithes restored, its external threats contained. The specific details of the Iron Vigil's enlightened conquest, the cultural obliteration, the Argus devastation, the unimaginable cost of the unification protocol, these were either buried deep in classified archives, dismissed as necessary expedient, or simply never fully comprehended by an administratum too vast and overburdened to grasp the nuances of such grim victories. The Iron Vigil was simply another chapter, serving the Emperor in its own unique way. The legacy of the Iron Vigil was one of terrible effectiveness. They proved that absolute unity could be achieved, that humanity, however diverse, could be hammered into a single unyielding fist. But they also proved the profound and tragic cost of such an achievement. Their sector, the Athelian Reach, was a perfectly ordered machine, efficient and unified, but stripped bare of its soul, a silent, gray monument to a victory that tasted like ash. Chapter Master Solon Varkos, in his final years, remained an unyielding figure, his purpose unwavering until his eventual quiet demise. He was interred in a sarcophagus within the vanguard of Solon, not with hymns of glorious triumph, but with the solemn metallic hum of the ship's engines, a fittingly cold and pragmatic end for the great architect. His legacy was the Athelian Reach itself, a sector where humanity had been saved from external threats, but perhaps at the cost of its very humanity, a realm where order reigned supreme. But joy and individuality had been meticulously purged. The Iron Vigil continued its eternal watch, a self-perpetuating cycle of grim duty. They were a chapter born of a whispered cursed founding, shaped by a genetic imperative, and forged by an unshakable conviction. They were the grim, unblinking eyes of an Imperium willing to sacrifice everything to survive. A tragic example of how the noblest of intentions can be twisted into the most horrifying of realities in the endless, unforgiving night of the 41st millennium. Their legacy was not one of glory, but of grim, enduring purpose, forever patrolling a quiet, unified, and utterly broken sector, a grim monument to the enduring truth that even humanity's salvation can be its most profound tragedy. Chapter Master Solon Varkos was a man forged from the crucible of the Imperium's grim realities, hardened by 1,000 wars, and ultimately defined by the uncompromising philosophy he had imposed upon the Athelian Reach. His journey was not merely that of a chapter master, but of a singular individual burdened by a terrible vision, a man who had sacrificed not only billions of lives, but also the last vestiges of his own humanity for an ideal he believed was absolute necessity. He was a hero to some, a monster to many, and a tragic figure to none but himself, in the silent, unacknowledged depths of his soul. From the moment of his initial indoctrination, Varkos had displayed an almost pathological aversion to disunity. He had seen the chaos of internecine conflict, the weakness inherent in division, and had internalized the lesson with an intensity that bordered on the obsessive. This predisposition, amplified by the unique genetic traits of his chapter's gene seed, blossomed into a profound, unshakable conviction. Humanity's only hope lay in absolute, unwavering unity, enforced by any means necessary. His office, a Spartan chamber deep within the vanguard of Solon, reflected his singular focus. There were no personal trinkets, no decorations save for the chapter's austere heraldry and an ancient functional cogitator array that projected the real-time status of the Athelian Reach. Here, amidst the flickering data streams and the distant hum of the ship's engines, Varkos spent most of his waking hours, his massive form hunched over tactical displays, his mind ceaselessly working. He was no longer a warrior leading charges, but a grand strategist, an architect constantly refining his terrible, perfect design. The weight of his decisions was immense, yet Varkos bore it with an almost chilling detachment. He had personally ordered the orbital bombardment of the Argus Belt, leading to the deaths of billions. He had sanctioned the cultural purges on countless worlds, extinguishing the vibrant heritage of entire civilizations. He had authorized the brutal re-education of dissidents, turning defiant individuals into compliant cogs. Each command was a stroke of the great architect's hammer, reshaping the sector according to his vision. In his rare, solitary moments of contemplation, deep within his fortified chambers, Varkos would sometimes review the early pit captures of the Athelian Reach, images of teeming, diverse populations, bustling markets, unique architectures. He would then compare them to the cold, efficient, uniform images of the sector under Iron Vigil rule. A lesser man might have felt a pang of regret, a flicker of doubt about the devastation wrought. But Varkos saw only progress. He saw the transition from chaos to order, from vulnerability to strength. The cost to him was always secondary to the ultimate goal. His inner world was a fortress of logic and grim rationale. He understood, intellectually, the suffering he caused. He was aware of the fear and resentment that percolated beneath the surface of his unified worlds, feeding the Calithan scourge. But he perceived these as necessary evils, transient imperfections in the grand design. He believed that future generations born into a truly unified and secure Imperium would look back and understand the terrible necessity of his actions. He was building salvation, one scorched world at a time. The most profound burden he carried was perhaps the unspoken loneliness of his conviction. His captains and librarians, though loyal and indoctrinated, could not truly share the weight of his ultimate responsibility. He was the prime mover, the one whose will alone guided the chapter's relentless crusade. He had seen too much, sacrificed too much, to ever turn back or entertain an alternative. Any deviation from the path of absolute unity, in his mind, was an invitation to the abyss, a regression to the very chaos he sought to eradicate. His personal interactions became increasingly formal, almost robotic. He spoke in pronouncements, his voice a gravelly monotone, his words precise and devoid of any personal inflection. He no longer saw the faces of his battle brothers as individuals, but as extensions of his will, sharpened instruments of his purpose. His own body, encased in custom-forged artificer armor, seemed less a human form and more a living monument to his unshakable resolve. His face, when glimpsed without his helmet, was a gaunt mask of weathered ceramite, his eyes like chips of ancient ice reflecting only the cold, hard light of his unwavering duty. Chief Librarian Valerius, one of the few who still had access to Varkos's inner thoughts through tightly controlled psychic communion, often described the chapter master's mind as a diamond of pure purpose, cold and unyielding. There was no malice, no cruelty for its own sake, only an absolute, unshakable belief in the necessity of his actions, a conviction so profound it had burned away all sentiment. He did not delight in destruction. He simply accepted it as an unavoidable part of his sacred duty. Solon Varkos was humanity's grim protector in the Athelian Reach, a shepherd who believed the only way to save his flock was to brand them with iron and prune them relentlessly until only the most resilient and most obedient remained. He was burdened by a vision of ultimate absolute unity, and his unwavering pursuit of it had transformed him into something less than human. Yet perhaps, in the grim calculus of the 41st millennium, precisely what humanity needed. He was the tragic hero who saw the abyss and believed the only way to overcome it was to descend into an even deeper one, dragging all of humanity with him, whether they wanted to or not. His was a hero's burden indeed, but one that left a trail of desolation and despair in its wake, all for the sake of a salvation that tasted like ash. The Iron Vigil's meticulously crafted order in the Athelian Reach, a monument to Chapter Master Solon Varkos's unyielding vision, had weathered internal dissent, crushed rebellion, and even learned to manage the insidious threat of the Calithan scourge. They believed their dominion was absolute, their control unchallengeable. They had forgotten, perhaps, that the galaxy possessed an infinite capacity for new and unimagined horrors, especially those of a scale that dwarfed even their own brutal methods. The ultimate test of their enforced unity, and indeed their very survival, arrived in the form of a tendril of a Tyranid splinter fleet, a swirling vortex of alien biological terror that emerged from the galactic void, hungry and implacable. The initial reports were fragmentary, chilling whispers from deep void sensor arrays on the furthest reaches of the sector. Astropaths screamed of a growing shadow, an absence in the warp, a sensation of immense, ravenous hunger. Then came the physical evidence: derelict scout ships, ravaged and lifeless, their crews utterly consumed. The Iron Vigil, though isolated, was well versed in the lore of the Imperium's greatest threats. The descriptions coalesced into a single, terrifying identification: Tyranids. Chapter Master Varkos received the intelligence with a grim silence that settled heavy on the bridge of the vanguard of Solon. The holographic map of the Athelian Reach, usually a serene display of ordered star lanes and controlled planets, now pulsed with a new crimson warning. This was not a disunited populace, nor a subtle psychic parasite. This was an existential threat of unimaginable scale, a Xenos species driven by a primal, insatiable hunger, utterly immune to ideology or persuasion. It was the ultimate destroyer of order, consuming all life, all biomass, leaving only sterile rock in its wake. The vanguard organisms of the splinter fleet arrived first, mycetic spores plummeting through atmospheres like burning tears, disgorging grotesque bioforms that immediately began to terraform worlds into nutrient-rich organic soup. Hive tyrants, accompanied by swarms of hormigants and termagants, poured from the bellies of colossal hive ships, overwhelming nascent Imperial Guard garrisons, their monstrous claws and living weaponry tearing through plasteel and flesh with equal ease. The first world to fall was Aegis Prime, a heavily fortified world on the sector's edge, a monument to Imperial engineering and the Iron Vigil's strict adherence to defense protocols. Its orbital defenses, formidable against human or lesser Xenos fleets, were simply overwhelmed by the sheer, unthinking mass of the Tyranid Hive fleet. Swarms of gargoyles darkened the skies, screening the descent of larger bioships. The orbital platforms designed to protect against conventional weapons were dismantled by acid-spitting organisms and boarding torpedoes filled with ravenous creatures. The defense grid, carefully integrated by the Iron Vigil, was designed to act as one, but the Tyranids did not understand unified command. They understood only overwhelming force and consuming numbers. On the planet's surface, the Imperial Guard fought with desperate bravery, but their numbers, though vast, were insufficient against the tide. Laser guns and bolters scythed down thousands of Tyranid creatures, but for every alien slain, 10 more surged forward. The Iron Vigil, deploying their best companies, fought with unparalleled ferocity, their power armor stained with ichor, their chainswords singing through alien carapaces. Captain Lyris, leading a spearhead into a critical command center, found himself surrounded by hundreds of gaunts, his thunderhammer a blur of destructive force. He held the line, but it was a losing battle against an infinite foe. The Tyranids were not interested in conquering, they were interested only in consumption. Their advance was relentless, an unstoppable wave of biological horror. Psychers on Aegis Prime were silenced by the terrifying psychic shadow of the hive mind, their minds crushed by the alien intellect, leaving the sector's astropathic choirs screaming in silent agony. Communication with the doomed world flickered, then died, replaced by the chilling, pervasive silence of a world being devoured. Within days, Aegis Prime, a world populated by billions and fortified by the Imperium's finest, was little more than a dead planet, its oceans boiling, its continents stripped bare, its biomass harvested. The scale of the destruction was beyond anything the Iron Vigil had ever witnessed. Their own purges, however brutal, had been surgical, aimed at reshaping. The Tyranids were a force of pure, unadulterated annihilation. Chapter Master Varkos, watching the sensor readings go dark, understood the true gravity of the situation. All their years of enforced unity, all their brutal restructuring, all their efforts to create a perfect bulwark were threatened with total obliteration. The Tyranid threat was the ultimate disunifier, capable of erasing not just culture, but all life, leaving nothing behind. He convened an emergency council of his surviving captains and chief librarian Valerius. The gravity of the situation was etched on every face. "Brothers," Varkos' voice was heavy, a rare tremor of desperation beneath his stoic facade. "The great devourer is upon us. This is the doom we have spent our lives preparing for, the ultimate chaos that seeks to unravel all order. Our sector, the fruit of our unyielding crusade, stands on the precipice of oblivion. The debate was brief, grim, and to the point. Conventional defense, even with the Iron Vigil's disciplined forces and the sector's vast Imperial Guard legions, was impossible against such numbers. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the Tyranid advance threatened to splinter their forces, to isolate worlds, and to devour the sector piecemeal. Their perfect order was about to be undone by a foe that had no concept of order, only instinctual hunger. This was the darkest hour for the Iron Vigil. All their grim victories, all their sacrifices, all their brutal enforcement of unity, faced an enemy that cared nothing for human ideals, only biomass. The unified Athelian Reach, a testament to the Iron Vigil's brutal efficiency, was now a feast laid out for an unimaginable horror, its very existence threatened with absolute final erasure. The question was no longer whether they could maintain order, but whether any shred of humanity, unified or not, would survive the onslaught of the Leviathan's shadow. The encroaching horror of the Tyranid splinter fleet, a swirling vortex of insatiable hunger, demanded a response commensurate with its apocalyptic scale. Chapter Master Solon Varkos, facing the imminent annihilation of everything he had built, knew that conventional defense would only delay the inevitable. The Iron Vigil's doctrine of absolute unity, painstakingly imposed and ruthlessly enforced, now faced its ultimate manifestation, a sector-wide suicidal stand. Varkos enacted what he grimly termed the Unification Protocol, a desperate, unprecedented strategy that would force the entire Athelian Reach into a single, centralized defense grid, making every world a fortified bastion and every civilian a conscripted, essential part of the war effort. It was the ultimate horrific expression of their ideal. From the bridge of the vanguard of Solon, Varkos issued the commands that would seal the fate of billions. All existing Imperial Guard regiments were immediately recalled, no matter their current deployment, and massed into defensive formations on designated redoubt worlds. Every able-bodied civilian, regardless of age or gender, was conscripted, not merely into labor battalions, but into rudimentary militia units, equipped with whatever weaponry could be mustered. Repurposed mining lasers, salvaged kinetic rifles, even sharpened tools. Factories that had once produced civilian goods or agricultural machinery were immediately converted to arms manufacture, churning out basic slug throwers and armor plating. The automated environmental reclaimers, once symbols of engineered prosperity, were redeployed as emergency resource gatherers, tearing through planetary crusts to extract raw materials for fortifications. Entire cities were evacuated, their populations relocated to vast underground bunkers or reinforced orbital stations, turning the surface of dozens of worlds into desolate battlefields. The STC fragment, the relic of unity, became a grim instrument of war, its efficiency now dedicated to creating death traps for the alien horde. The Iron Vigil themselves became the unyielding backbone of this suicidal defense. Stripped of all non-essential duties, every battle brother was assigned to a critical defense node. Their task was not merely to fight, but to inspire, to enforce discipline, and to execute any who faltered or attempted to flee. Captain Lyris led a contingent of Terminators to the orbital shipyards of Viridia Secundus, rallying the desperate shipwrights and the newly conscripted militia to build defensive platforms and arm hastily converted cargo haulers with whatever weapons could be mounted. Chief Librarian Valerius, his psychic might stretched to its absolute limits, became the nexus of the sector's psychic defense. He gathered every available psyker, trained or untrained, from the few loyal Scholastica Sicana to the nascent, unsanctioned psychers who had emerged in response to the Calithan Scourge. These desperate, hastily assembled choirs were deployed to amplify the sector's psychic defenses, to erect psychic shields against the encroaching shadow of the hive mind, and to provide limited warning of Tyranid movements. It was a perilous task. Many psychers simply burned out, their minds collapsing under the strain, or were consumed by the hive mind's pervasive influence. The scale of the Unification Protocol was breathtaking in its grim ambition. Worlds were systematically stripped of their natural beauty, transformed into fortresses of ferrocrete and plasteel. Entire planetary populations were forced to become soldiers, their lives deemed expendable in the face of the alien horror. The Iron Vigil did not ask for volunteers. They demanded obedience. Any attempts at insubordination, any flicker of fear or dissent, was met with swift, brutal summary execution by the chapter's chaplains or their stern enforcers. This was not merely warfare, it was the ultimate horrifying manifestation of Chapter Master Varkos's ideal. Every human, every resource, every ounce of will, utterly unified under a single unyielding command, all directed towards a singular desperate goal: survival. The Tyranid fleet descended like a plague, their numbers seemingly infinite. Worlds fell in a maelstrom of claws, teeth, and living weapons, but now they met not fragmented resistance, but a unified, if desperate, wall of defiance. On the agri world of Harvestia, now a fortified death trap, billions of conscripts, under the unyielding gaze of the Iron Vigil, fought with a grim determination. They were not fighting for freedom, but for the continued existence of humanity, however brutal that existence might be. The Reclaimers, now repurposed as mobile barricades, belched smoke and fire, defending crucial choke points. The Iron Vigil itself bore the brunt of the most intense fighting. On world after world, they fought holding actions, buying precious hours, sometimes days, for civilian evacuations and the completion of defensive structures. Battle Brother Kalis, now a hardened veteran of the Long War, found himself fighting alongside Imperial Guard conscripts on a ravaged industrial world. He saw the terror in their eyes, yet also the grim resolve forged by the Iron Vigil's harsh discipline. They were broken, yes, but they were also unyielding, a testament to the terrible effectiveness of absolute command. He witnessed their desperate charges against bio-titans, their bodies shredded, yet their lines reforming, their actions dictated by the omnipresent Vox commands of the Iron Vigil. The climax of the defense came at the Viridian Gate, a crucial choke point in the sector's astrogation lanes, where the remnants of the Iron Vigil fleet, supported by a flotilla of hastily armed civilian vessels, met the main Tyranid Hive fleet tendril. It was a battle of attrition, a swirling vortex of macro cannon fire, lance strikes, and the sickening impact of biomissiles. The Vanguard of Solon, Chapter Master Varkos at its command, became the unmoving anchor of the line, its mighty weapons blazing, its void shields flickering under the relentless assault. In the depths of space, amidst the carnage, the sacrifices piled high, Iron Vigil battle brothers performed boarding actions against towering Hive ships, detonating vital systems at great personal cost. Imperial Guard ships, outgunned and outmatched, executed desperate ramming attacks, turning themselves into blazing fireballs to delay the Xenos advance. The psychic choirs, straining under Valerius's command, screamed their agony, their combined mental might pushing back against the shadow of the hive mind, creating brief, precious windows of clarity for fleet movements. The cost was apocalyptic. Entire fleets were annihilated. Billions more died on the besieged worlds, their lives extinguished in the maelstrom. The Athelian Reach was not just a battlefield. It was a charnel house, every world a tomb, every void lane choked with the debris of shattered ships and consumed organic matter. Yet, against all odds, the Tyranid tendril was eventually halted. Crippled, battered, and having gorged itself on an unimaginable feast of biomass, the splinter fleet finally turned, its relentless hunger guiding it away from the sector, seeking easier prey. The Athelian Reach, a ghost of its former self, was spared utter consumption. The Iron Vigil had won. They had pushed back the Great Devourer, but the victory was silent, hollow, and utterly devastating. The ultimate manifestation of their enforced unity had saved the sector, but at a cost that rendered the concept of victory almost meaningless. Their great sacrifice had been made, and the sector had been saved, but it was a salvation that tasted like dust and death.